Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Welcome, everybody, to one more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. And this week, joining us from beautiful, sunny and warm Lisbon in Portugal is Gonçalo Valverde. Hi, Gonçalo. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Vasco, and thank you for welcoming me here and inviting me into this wonderful podcast.
Absolutely. So Gonçalo is an Agile coach from Portugal, working with teams and organizations in their continuous improvement journey. As a keen amateur photographer, he learned that less is more and how constraints help one focus on the outcomes. He's also the co-organizer of the Agile Coach Camp in Portugal. So, Gonçalo, that was a short intro to you. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you end up becoming a Scrum Master?
Well, that's a really great question. And if you asked me some years ago if I wanted to be a Scrum Master, to be honest, some years ago, I didn't even had an idea what was Scrum Master. I started working many years ago in the 90s in a startup, and I was mostly a technical career, doing integration, system administration, networking, etc. Then I started doing project management and leading teams and coordinating projects and doing architecture, etc. And I never really enjoyed to be a project manager, to be honest. But I always thought it was my problem because, things were not happening as expected. There was always delays, things that never quite went according to the plan. And I was thinking, I'm a really bad project manager. But then I started reading things and then understanding better. And then I saw other people that believe like me. And then I started understanding more about Agile because my background was not exactly programming. So that's why probably Agile entered a bit later in my life. And then I was looking at that and thought, I'm not the only crazy. I'm not crazy. I'm not the only guy thinking like this. So this could be some interesting things to do because I worked for quite some time in a big corporation. And typically the idea is that, people work in different projects at the same time because we need to optimize resources, etc., etc. And that never really felt quite the best way to work, and all the problems of people switching contexts, etc. The more I started reading, the more I started understanding. I thought, this makes sense. And interestingly, in one of the projects that we were working, we were in a bit empiric way going into Agile, like for example, challenge our colleagues that designed the requirements, saying, don't give us huge requirements, bring us smaller things instead of telling us what we need you to do, that we need to do, tell us what you want, let's do smaller release, etc. So it was a bit of step by step. Then I learned more, then I understand. Then fortunately the organization where I was the CEO decided now we are an Agile organization, and that empowered us to start doing more changes. Because we want to change things. Now we are Agile, great. So let's start creating Scrum teams here. And due to that, I also learned more to be a Scrum Master, invested my time there, and helped build some of the first Scrum teams here in Portugal.
The journey of going through I would call it the disappointment with project management.
Yes.
That's how I call it myself, right? Because a lot of your story kind of resonates with me since I also started exploring Agile and other methods also because of my disappointment with project management, right? Now, I understand that, as we go, as we learn more, we try to, maybe tweak it kind of like, because you learn from experience and you try to apply different things and so on. But jumping to Scrum is usually, just like you said, the CEO just decided, or in my case, it was the CTO who decided, right? and that usually happens. And very often, at least for us who started with this in the 90s, like you did and I did too, there's a lot of this novelty, right? Because we came into Agile when we already had a lot of knowledge of how software got developed. I mean, let's not forget that probably you and definitely I also read a lot about, requirements traceability and the need to have all of the requirements in some kind of tool and even linking them to changes in the code and so on. And all of those things seem so logical, and we need to track everything. But we kind of lost the meaning of what that was. And I was happy that Agile brought that back. I mean, today, everyone does requirements traceability through a tool like Jira and GitHub, for example, right? We know exactly which Jira item was the reason for a specific change in the code. And at that time, it was kind of a dream, right? So we kind of evolved as an industry also because of Agile, right? Jira was not even a tool that was considered, reasonable by the old school project management people. But this also brings a lot of challenges for us. And maybe we're going to talk about a challenge that you faced as a Scrum Master, because we bring a different perspective, right? We were not born in the new Agile world. We were born in the waterfall world, if you will. So tell us that story, Gonçalo, a story of a difficult moment that you faced as a Scrum Master. Maybe it had to do with the first few years as a Scrum Master, maybe not. It doesn't really matter. But tell us that story and walk us through the steps of how that evolved, the conversations, the meetings, the events of that story. We'll dive into the insights later on, but tell us that story first, Gonçalo.
One interesting thing that you said also is that in Agile, things are even more organized than in the past. And sometimes this is probably one of the things that teams take longer to understand. So I'll tell you a story of failure. Years ago, I was working with a team, actually two teams that were building a product. And we already had the challenging date to achieve because, of course, we're doing Scrum, but a lot of times, we need to deliver a fixed scope with a fixed time. And that was already decided because even before I was joining that team. And in the middle of the time that we had to deliver, the CTO appeared, the new CTO appeared, and he came and said, "Oh, but we need to change all of these also, and you need to change all the data model." I was looking at that and thought, I'm not sure if this is going to work well. And okay, I was new also there, so I didn't push it that much back. Then this change started appearing and being pushed into the teams. I started pushing it back, also discussed this with the team. How can we not go into that direction? The team was definitely not happy of changing a lot of things. And I explained to them what could be the problem, because the idea we wanted still to continue to deliver things, but at the same time doing another branch to the side that would be breaking everything when they merge it. And what I did the user story mapping with everyone. Then I look at, okay, this is what we need to do in the future in terms of stories, in terms of epics first, and then in terms of stories. Then I did a forecast to see if this was achievable at least. And I used the Monte Carlo simulation, the spreadsheet from Troy Magennis. And looking at that, optimistically, we will need at least 2 more months than what was needed. And my mistake there was I presented this, but with a half-hearted manner.
What do you mean by half-hearted?
I felt, okay, I'm pretty sure this is what's going to happen. But to be honest, I was really a bit afraid of presenting there, giving the bad news. I was the bearer of bad news. This is not achievable.
So you tried to soften the bad news. Was that what you did?
Yes. I didn't emphasize it that this would not be possible, because I knew the throughput of the team. It was clear. I totally ignored the story points. It was more, okay, this is what they're delivering in each sprint. This is the amount of tasks that we still need to do, amount of stories. Actually, they were not even using user stories at that time. And it was clear to me that it was not possible.
So you did the story map, and that gave you the number of stories that you needed to deliver.
With a forecast, yes, because we knew that X and the number of epics typically were decomposed in X stories.
Okay, so you listed all the epics, and then for those that you had the stories, you listed the stories. For those that you did not have the stories, you used a multiplier,
yes.
right? So whatever that is. And then you did the Monte Carlo simulation of what the progress would be towards
Exactly.
the future, and you came up with a date of minimum 2 months more than what was expected.
Exactly.
Minimum 2 months more.
Minimum. And
Okay.
this was the minimum.
So most likely it would be more than 2 months later.
A more clear, a more honest will be something like 3 to 4 months.
Yeah. So, and then you went to the I guess the leadership of that project, and you delivered the bad news, but softly.
Exactly.
So what happened next?
Well, first of all, talked with the PO. They didn't like it that much. Then I presented this to the leadership, to the CTO, etc. Again, it was a bit okay. This is what I believe, but then I didn't push it. This is what is going to happen. This is what I believe, but it was a bit half-hearted. Then what happened? Things continued. The CTO continued to push that to happen anyway. Then more changes appeared, and over a sudden,
which is always the case, right?
Of course.
When you start that process, you don't even know what else will come.
Definitely not. And even worse, it was the idea of a separate branch. So we were continue developing things in one direction, and we created a separate branch then that we needed to merge some way the next months. And I was looking at that, I thought, okay, this is not going to work well. And what happened is when they merged it was a total disaster.
Which is always the case, by the way.
Of course. And even worse,
oh my God,
the team was doing overtime like crazy. So, of course, the quality of code was bad. Actually, I raised the concern, okay, we're going to put people working overtime. This is going to have these kind of problems, etc. So what I learned from that is next time that I face these kind of situations, I will not be half-hearted. I will be, even if I get fired for delivering the bad news, I will do it. It's in the end, it's the worst situation for the team, for the Scrum Master, because you feel that you failed miserably to the team and to the organization, and also to the organization because then everything is a complete chaos.
And one of the things that you just, deliver the bad news, even if you get fired. And some people would say that's not a really good career move. But the way I look at it is that at the end of the day, we need to be in peace with our own decisions. Like what you said was that because nobody really took what I said to heart, the team ended up suffering, working overtime and so on and so forth. And of course, eventually the company would end up suffering as well if the product couldn't be released and the revenues generated from that. And I think that's a very important insight, is that we don't always need to be the martyr in these situations, but we need to be in peace with ourselves, right? And if you believed that it was going to take minimum 2 months, and of course that's if you were not using multiple branches and not doing overtime and so on and so forth, then I think it is fair to say that as Scrum Masters, we need to come up and say, this is not possible. We need to start finding alternatives.
One of the things that I would have done differently now, instead of doing this, it will be put things more clear and make people say that, okay, we accept that risk. By asking the question, okay, this is the forecast. So what you're telling me is that you want the team to do overtime, you want the team to do multiple branches, you accept the risk, and you want us to put in a situation where we don't have an idea where we are because none of what we're doing can be considered done. Is that what you think? Or is that what you want? Okay, if it's that what they want, then okay, it's the decision of the organization, which is always a bad decision. But at least they put it explicitly. The big problem here, it was not that much explicit. It was shown, but it was hidden under the rug, etc. So make it explicit to everyone.
And it was also behind a huge wall of optimism, right?
A huge one.
And that's actually one of the things that for us as Scrum Masters, we need to be careful with optimism when it comes to delivering, because eventually the teams end up suffering. That was a great story. Thank you for sharing that, Gonçalo.
Thank you also.
Monday is about what we learn from our obstacles and our failures. But tomorrow is Team Tuesday here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. We explore teams and their journeys, the habits they develop that threaten their performance, how each of our guests helped their teams evolve, and the one key lesson they learned from that experience. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.